All right, so we are going to be working with the notes that say solve quadratic equations by factoring. Remember to have these notes sitting in front of you before you start copying down this lesson. They can be found in Google Classroom if you don't already have these notes copied. So we are going to follow these set of steps to help us solve by factoring. So we're going to make sure first that we move all terms to one side of the equal sign. Usually we will move everything to the left. After that, we will factor the polynomial. We will set each of those factors equal to 0. And then we will solve each equation, and then we will list the solutions. There's no particular order that I'm going to have you list the solutions. Just make sure that all are listed. All right, so if you look at example 1, it's already been factored. So everything was already moved to the left because it's set equal to 0. That's how we know everything's over to the left. They already went ahead and factored this one for us. So they did a couple of the steps for us already. So now that we know what the two factors are, we're going to take the first factor and we're going to set it equal to 0. And we're going to take the second factor and we're going to set it equal to 0. Now they're very simple linear equations, so we're just going to solve each linear equation. So the first step here is to add 3 to the other side, so we get x equals 3. On this one, all we have to do is subtract 1, so x equals -1. So our solutions are 3 and -1. The second example is also already factored for us. They factored out a GCF of x, which left with us with 5x minus 2. So again, everything's already been moved to the left because it's set equal to 0, and they already factored using the GCF. So now we're going to take each of those factors and set them equal to 0. So we have x equals 0 and 5x minus 2 equals 0. This first equation's already solved because x is already by itself. This one we're going to have to solve. Our first step will be to add 2. So we'll have 5x equals 2. And then we're going to have to divide by 5. So x equals 2/5. So our solutions are 0 and 2/5. So again, on these first two examples, they were already factored for us. So we were able to skip down to step number 3 up here and then follow those steps from there. The next page of notes, example 3, you can see that everything's already been moved to one side of the equation because it's set equal to 0. But this one has not been factored for us. So the first thing we're going to do is see if there's a GCF. Not all of the terms have an x, so x cannot be our GCF. And there are no numbers that can divide all 3 of those terms. So there's no GCF on this one. So we're going to go straight to factoring it. So I'm going to set up my 2 parentheses equal to 0. Remember, x and x for that x squared. And now we've got to think of factors of -22 that add up to -9. So if you start listing your factors, you got -22 times 1, +22 times -1, -11 times 2, and +11 times -2. You will see right here that if we were to add those two factors together, we would get that -9. So our factors are -11 and +2. So now it's factored, so we can set each factor equal to 0 and solve each equation. So we'll add 11 and we'll subtract 2. So our solutions are +11 and -2. On this next example, we need to first move this -49 over to the rest of the terms. The opposite of subtracting 49 is adding. So we'll have 4x squared minus 28x plus 49 equals 0. Now it's in standard form. Now we're going to look to factor. There are not any numbers they have in common because even though these two are divisible by 4, this one isn't. These two are divisible by 7, but this one isn't. So, and none of them they don't all have x's. So there's no GCF on this one. So we're going to have to factor this. So we're going to use our X method to help us factor this. Make sure you have a calculator handy for this particular problem. So I've got my calculator here. So remember, we're going to multiply the first and the last term. And we're going to put that number up here. And then we're going to take our middle term here. And we're going to put that down here. So we're looking for factors of 196 that add up to negative 28. We know they both have to be negative because a negative times a negative will give you this positive, and a negative plus a negative will give you this negative here. So we've got to think of what these factors could be. Well, if we multiply 14 and 14, that gives us 196. And if we add 14 and 14, we get 28. So our factors must be negative 14 and negative 14. On top of each of those, we're going to put that 4x. And both of these are the same. Just remember, we've got to simplify. Both of these are divisible by 2. And both of these are divisible by 2. So our factors are 2x minus 7 and 2x minus 7. So that's what I'm going to put here. This is one of those perfect squares that we were looking at on our last lesson. It's not necessary for us to solve both of them because we're going to get the same answer regardless. So I'm just going to take the one parenthesis, set it equal to 0, and solve it. So I'll add 7. So that gives me 2x equals 7. Then I'm going to divide by 2. So x equals 7/2 is our answer. Looking here at example 5, everything is on the left, but this time everything is divisible by 2. Not just 2, but we want to try to make this leading coefficient a positive. So I'm going to multiply everything by negative 2. Remember, what you do to one piece of an equation, you have to do to the other. That negative 2, remember, is our GCF, so I've got to write that down. And then in a parenthesis, I'm going to put what's left when I divide each piece by negative 2. So negative 2 divided by negative 2 is 1, so we have 1x squared. Negative 4 divided by negative 2 is positive 2, so we have positive 2x. And 30 divided by negative 2 is negative 15. So now bringing down that negative 2 again, I need to factor this further. So I'm looking for factors of negative 15 that add to 2. You can use this X method again every single time you're trying to factor something other than the GCF. So if you need to do it that way, you can. This one's going to be a little bit easier for us because we're just looking for factors of negative 15 that add to 2. So we know each of our parentheses are going to start with an X, and it's going to factor into positive 5 and negative 3, because 5 times negative 3 is negative 15. 5 plus negative 3 is positive 2. So this one has 3 factors. This one, though, does not have an x. And remember, we're trying to solve for x. So if this one doesn't have an x, there's no reason for us to set that equal to 0 and try to solve it. I'm just going to take these two and set each of those equal to 0. Pencil here. So on this one, I have to subtract 5. So I get x equals negative 5. Here I have to add 3, so x equals 3. So my solutions are negative 5 and 3. The last example, set equal to 0, so everything's already been moved. This one has a GCF. Both numbers are divisible by 3, and they all have at least one x. So my GCF is 3x. So now I'm going to put in a parenthesis what's left when I divide each piece by 3x. Well, 3 divided by 3 is 1. X to the third Take away one of those, we're just left with x squared, minus 12 divided by 3 is 4. X up here cancels with that x down there, so I'm just left with x squared minus 4. Bringing down that GCF of 3x again, I'm going to now factor that x squared minus 4 further. Remember, the middle term is missing. We've talked about these before. That's the same thing as saying x squared plus 0x minus 4. So we're looking for factors of negative 4 that add up to 0. The only factors of negative 4 that add up to 0 are positive 2 and negative 2. So this has 3 factors. In this case, all 3 factors have an x, so we are going to have to set all 3 factors equal to 0. So we'll have 3x equals 0, x plus 2 equals 0, and x minus 2 equal to 0. All we have to do on this first one is divide by 3. That gives us 0. All we have to do on the second one is subtract 2. So that gives us x equals negative 2. And this last one we add 2. So x equals positive 2. So our solutions are 0, negative 2, and positive 2. The last example, doing the same thing here. All of them are divisible by 2, and they all have an x in common. So I'm going to write down the GCF of 2x, and then in a parenthesis, I'm going to put what's left when we divide each of those terms by 2x. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 3 x's, take away one of them, we're left with x squared. Minus 4 divided by 2 is 2. 2 x's, take away 1, gives us 1x. Negative 30 divided by 2 is negative 15. X, take away an x, there's no more x's. Now we're going to factor that further. Again, we're looking for factors of negative 15 that add up to negative 2. We had one very similar to this a problem or two ago, only this was a positive 2 here. So we know x squared is x and x, and the factors of negative 15 that add up to negative 2 are negative 5 and 3, because negative 5 times 3 is negative 15, and negative 5 plus 3 is negative 2. 3 factors, all of them have an x, so I'm going to set all 3 of them equal to 0. Solve each one. So my solutions are 0, 5, and negative 3. Please join me on Thursday at 2 o'clock on Google Meets if you need me to explain anything further or if you have any questions. See you then.